and I felt this weight. Like I was a big, strong guy, and I felt a weight. I couldn't move. Like I couldn't lift myself up. And this is going to sound crazy, but I heard a voice that wasn't my internal monologue that said, Eric, if you try to move again, you'll die. Well, I didn't know I had a 22 centimeter tear in my aortic arch.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Fugit, and I served Warzone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. Today, we hear the inspirational combat story of Eric Hollen, a former Ranger in 275 Ranger Regiment and Green Beret with 2nd Battalion, 10th Special Forces Group. This is a unique episode where we filmed in person for a change, while Eric and I were in Graham, Texas, courtesy of Greg Coker, who many of you will recognize from the podcast, for an aviation hog hunt to benefit veterans and Gold Star families. In this episode, Eric shares what was going through his head when he sustained a life-altering injury on his horse farm in Tennessee, and how he persevered through dark times to reach a level of excellence very few will ever see. Eric was awarded USA Shooting's Paralympic Athlete of the Year 2 years in a row and competed in the Olympics as a shooter for the U.S. He strives to help newly injured veterans through a program called CARE Coalition, which supports injured Special Ops soldiers. I hope you enjoy his inspirational story as much as I did. Eric, thanks for taking the time to share your story today.
It's my honor to be hanging out with you, Ryan.
Appreciate it so much. I just quickly wanted to share the backdrop that we have here today. We're in Graham, Texas, courtesy of Greg Coker, who I had interviewed previously and some may know from the show. But this is the Young County Warrior Ranch. It's an opportunity for vets to come out this weekend. It's hog hunting, which is pretty cool. There's a shooting competition going on back here. There's skeet shooting going on. We did some fishing. It's just a great opportunity. I just wanted to put it in a plug for this place that really cares about vets and opens their doors to them all year long. And I think it's a fitting place for us to be now that we've got Eric here, who is an Olympic caliber shooter. So it's a fitting backdrop for us as we kick off this interview. So I wanted to kick off with this shooting theme and ask you about growing up, the earliest time you had a weapon in your hand. Because I think somebody who has the shooting resume you do, would just imagine at a very young age you were picking up a weapon, but maybe that's not the case.
No, that's true. My dad was assistant chief of police in my hometown, so I was born and raised in Santa Cruz, California. So grew up on the beach, but we did a lot of shooting as a kid. And honestly, my dad was like, he thought I was terrible.
A terrible shot?
Yeah. I don't know if I just couldn't figure out like dominant eye, non-dominant eye. It took a while to figure it out as a little. So I probably had a firearm in my hands with help from my dad, like standing behind me when I was 6.
Jeez.
Yeah, 6, and then all the way through childhood and into adulthood.
And was it out on a range or were you guys out hunting?
No, it was we shot on the range. My dad wasn't a big hunter, so everything I did was target practice stuff. So.
Okay. And your childhood, was it mainly outdoors?
Yeah, a lot of outdoors, like, motocross, skiing, surfing, and then organized sports as a kid, football, baseball, that kind of thing.
If you think back to that childhood, what was one of the more dangerous moments growing up that you recall?
I had a lot of them.
I'm sure there are a lot.
Well, yeah, so the adrenaline kind of, I guess, like as you think about, I'm sure you interview a lot of guys, we probably have like a common theme or a common thread, and you have a military background as well, correct?
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, so they're kind of this adrenaline junkie kind of thing, and it started young for me. I started motocross riding and racing about 8 years old. So there was wrecks and sudden stops and broken bones and trips to the hospital and all those kind of things.
And I'm glad you brought that up. One of the themes that I noticed talking to a lot of the folks who have been in the special ops community like you have, and then have gone on to do things like you have. So, I mean, and we'll talk through it, but you've got special ops in the military, Olympic caliber talent, constantly chasing something, it seems like. Did you have that kind of ambition as a kid? Did you recognize it then, or did that develop over time?
No, so good question. I think focused effort kind of came to me in Special Forces selection and assessment. So yeah, out at Camp McCall, like I learned how to navigate through that I guess 4 weeks of getting gut checked.
Yeah.
So leading up to that, I think, the injury and all these things that occurred after the fact. So was there an adrenaline filled desire in my life? Absolutely. Was I seeking that? Yep. So I surfed big waves. I raced motocross. I did all that as a kid. And then at some point, I kind of tried to figure out a way to have that physicality and the adrenaline dump and all that stuff in my life, for sure. Yeah, that was part of it.
So it doesn't seem
the
like
thrill-seeking piece, right?
Yeah. And so I was just going to say, it doesn't seem like a big jump then for you to go into the military, but if you could take us back, kind of the decision, what age you were,
yeah,
how you came to that.
So the Lord's never been subtle in my life. It's always been like a hard hit in the head, like left turn here. So my left turn moment was as a senior in high school. I was getting gas at like 5 o'clock in the morning, getting ready to go surfing before class. And I pulled into a gas station north of town, north in Santa Cruz on Highway 1. And 2 Rangers, Grenada Raiders, were going to DLI. And so they got out of their truck, and it was just one of those fortuitous moments where I just bumped into them by happenstance, but it wasn't by accident. So those dudes were getting gas. I was getting gas as a big, strong kid. And, they had their starches and spits on, their OG 107s and their black berets and the whole 9 yards, right? And I was like, I'd grown up around pro football players and all that kind of thing. And these 2 dudes, had an intensity and something that I recognized and I wanted to be part of. In a 5-minute conversation, I knew that's where I wanted to go.
How did you strike up that conversation?
So I was getting gas. I was like, hey, what's up? You guys Rangers, And they were like, Roger, yeah, we are. And, I asked them a few questions, and they had their combat scrolls. And basically they were like, well, if you think you can make the team, come try out. And it was that kind of thing. And it just was so impactful because they had an intensity and a wherewithal about them that was unique to me that I hadn't really seen anywhere else. Like that.
Yeah.
That eye to eye kind of like, yeah, I will crush your soul kind of thing. And I felt something. I felt that, and it was like I don't know if you believe in divine intervention or like the Lord saying, hey man, pay attention to this.
Yeah. Man. They, at the time, had you followed the military much before that? Did you know about Grenada?
So
you
I did.
You could recognize the scroll and the beret?
Yeah, so I had a sense of it. So I had a step grandpa his name's Earl Taft, and he was a frogman in World War II in Korea, and he was a plank road member of the SEAL program for Vietnam. And he fought Joe Louis on ship.
Stop.
Yeah.
Stop.
He said it was the longest 9 minutes of his life, and he'd never been hit so hard. But he downplayed everything. He was a very strong man, a very quiet presence. And so I actually was a waterman, a good surfer, a good swimmer, and I thought I wanted to do the Navy SEAL thing. And he said, Eric, do the Army side of special operations. You won't like being on ship for extended periods of time. And I was like, okay. And then I met the guys, at the gas station one morning early, and then I went and signed up shortly thereafter.
Yeah. Was there ever a side of you that was like, oh, I could have gone that SEAL route, or no?
No, not really. No.
You knew it.
No, I didn't really ever look. I haven't had a whole lot of regret or like backward thinking that way. Just kind of 3 meters in front of me is kind of how I've led my life for the most part. No. So it's hard for me not to think about things in context of past to where I'm at now, and then how did I get here?
No, that makes sense. And I wonder, I mean, after you have that chance encounter, maybe not chance, but that encounter with those Rangers, was there ever a consideration like maybe I'll do that later, I'll go to college, or was it like, how do I get into this thing as soon as possible?
Yeah, it was like there was a bit of a sense of urgency, because school educationally was a struggle for me. Like I had like those diagnoses of like ADD, ADHD, dyslexia. Like I had these things that made me think like school was hard work for me, man.
Yeah.
It did not come easy, but physicality in sports came very easy. So path of least resistance in a way, right? Like
yep.
You like to do what you're good at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how, I would imagine the way you described your father, your step-grandfather, they take the news pretty well that you were joining.
They were like, thank God he found something to go do.
Because we didn't know what was
right. We don't want to
huh?
carry this kid forever. Jesus. No, I'm kidding. But
yeah.
Humor is a coping skill.
Right. No, it's true.
Yeah.
Especially with with what you went through, I'm sure, and we'll get into that. So we've kind of given an indication of the time frame as you're talking about the black beret for Rangers, which a lot of people here will remember. I mean, when they moved to the brown,
tan
beret, it was that was a big deal in the military. So back when they had the black berets, the starched uniform, when you joined up, what year are we talking about, and what did you sign up to do from the outset?
So 92, I was in 2nd Ranger Battalion from 92 to 96.
Okay, we had a tactical pause for a helicopter takeoff, which is not something you hear every day anymore. But so Eric, we were just talking about you signing up. You kind of talked through initially signing up in 92, but if you can, it sounds like you went right into the infantry straight into the Ranger Battalion. What was that like at the time for you? How old were you getting in, and what was that training like? Because everybody has heard it's just such a bear.
Yeah, I guess the thing about it that I really will never forget is when I first pulled into 2nd Ranger Battalion's compound, and I looked around and I knew I was home. Like I just fundamentally felt like I fit here.
Can you just
that was pretty
expand on that a little bit, because you're just signing up, right? I mean, you're the new guy, but you still felt like this was where you needed to be.
Yeah, I just felt fundamentally sound there. Like this is my tribe.
Wow. And that was before going through Ranger school. Jeez. How hard was that training for you? Because Lord knows you go on to SF training, but that first go around, I'm sure you're young at the time. What was that like for you?
Yeah, it was, the selection and assessment phases, whether it's like RIP to pre-Ranger to Ranger school, or the Q course selection and assessment, and then the phases 1, 2, and 3. You learn things about yourself in the progression of those selection and assessment phases. Like at some point, it's so miserable and crummy, and you're cold and wet, and it's wintertime for me in mountain phase of Ranger school, and I thought I was cold and miserable, and then a snowflake went right in my ear hole, and I was like, I just wanted to throw a baby fit, and so those, I'm so thankful to have had those experiences, because I really feel like number one thing I found out I could flip a switch and lean into something and just turn all the pain off and just get through it. Right. So that was the lessons learned. And then as we move, like as I moved into my injury, right, all of the defining aha moments that I had in those suck fests, those gut checks, really helped me navigate the injury.
Yeah.
Because the injury, like really, what I want to talk about, like my special operations background's built my foundation.
And you're not even talking about just the combat of that. It was
No. No, I mean, in Ranger Battalion, like we aren't there to hang out. Like we all want that scroll on our right shoulder that follows us wherever we go for the rest of our life.
So one of the guys I interviewed recently, Eddie Penny, was a dev crew guy, but he started out in the Marine Corps, and he described that moment that you just talked about, like the aha moment. He talked about this switch being flipped when he was at basic for the Marine Corps, and a drill sergeant just took him out and smoked him one day. And he said it made him a man at that moment. And I thought a little bit about that because I feel like people in that line of work probably have a moment like that. I wonder, is there anything that comes to mind? Like, was it the snowflake? Was it something at Ranger School?
It was kind of a cumulative effect, but there's like, you realize through the selection process that, well, I mean, you kind of have to lean into these things. Like, I don't care if it's like the MARSOC training or the guys that go through BUDS or Ranger Selection and Assessment now, RASP or Special Forces Selection and Assessment or 160th or whatever. Like, at some point they make it so crappy and miserable and hard that you just have, I don't know. I guess I'm elaborating in theory. Like, I think all of us have this fundamental similarity, but for me individually, like, I can speak to that. It was like, I either pass or I'll die trying.
Yeah.
Like, that was it. Like, failure was not an option.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean at times I thought, God, like, okay, I'll quit tomorrow. I'm just not going to tell anybody today or whatever. But I did use little mind games on myself because I just knew that, man, all I got to do is get through today.
Yeah.
Or maybe the next hour. Or I just had to break it down. Like, but quitting was never an option. Like, just goes against the grain.
When you went, if I can ask, what year did you go through Ranger School?
92.
Okay. I asked because my brother went through in 94, and I only bring it up because I think that the group ahead of him had 7 or 8 guys die
Yeah,
from
I know
hypothermia.
about that. I remember that.
And so I was just going to make a point, like, it is life or death in that training. I mean, it pushes you to the limit, and people don't want to tap out in that setting. So 92, it was
and guys die in
difficult. Training
all the time.
Yeah. So if we jump ahead, we were talking offline here. You mentioned that Second Ranger Bat was up for Somalia but did not go. I wonder, in your mind, how were you able to take that? Was it difficult for you to watch that?
Difficult for all of us because we go to bed every night expecting to go to war the next day. Like, we're not there to just hang out.
And then,
the culture of the Rangers, like World War II, Pointe du Hoc, and the cliffs of Normandy, and North Africa and Italy, and like those guys, when they came into Ranger Battalion or Ranger companies back then, it was a lifetime commitment. Like, you stayed in your unit till you either were injured, died, or the war was over.
Yeah.
So our history, like, we learn our Ranger history from the King James War forward, right? The colonies, like before the colonies were a colony, like I can't remember the exact date, but early 1600s. So we learn all that as young Rangers, and then we learn that history, and then it's like ingrained into our culture. And the beauty of, like, what I love about Ranger Battalion and the men I served with as a young man, like, I'm in touch with most of those guys. Like, there's 5 or 6 guys here that I served with then. Like, we get together once a year. There's this kind of unique thing about the Ranger Regiment that's different than any other unit is we were raised up together. Like, your Ranger buddy doesn't go anywhere without you. Like, you're never by yourself. It's to me, it's a very special place.
Yeah.
I can't, it almost makes me a little emotional just really thinking about it, because I've bumped into guys here that I worked with in Ranger Battalion and in 10th group, and when we get together, it's like it doesn't even really matter what we're doing. Yeah. It just happens that we're doing some pretty cool stuff here.
Yeah.
like running around in birds and shooting hogs and just, man, everybody has a huge smile on their face. So there's a Gold Star kid, right? A couple of kids here that dads were killed in Afghanistan or Iraq, and they're 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old kids, and they come off the aircraft. I watched those huge smiles on their face, and it didn't matter if you were 12 or 65. You had the same look on your face getting off the bird. It was amazing.
Yeah. And just for context, like the aircraft behind us, we were all sitting in that earlier, did a pattern, and we're shooting stationary targets from it, including kids. And you're right, the Gold Star kids, they announced, kind of did a little bit of an introduction for them earlier this morning, and that was just hard.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking, but
hard to watch. But
but yes. So one of my best friends in Ranger Battalion went to the unit, Steve Langmack, and I met his son Carson a few weeks ago, and Rachel I met long ago, and Rachel is Steve's wife and Carson's Steve's son, and when I was with them a few weeks ago up in Montana, I know this is going to sound a little funky, but I felt my brother's presence. Like I felt Steve's presence around. It was phenomenal. So I can't imagine that Gold Star piece, like to be Carson and growing up without his daddy, but around a lot of men that did know his dad.
Yeah, that's amazing. I would ask then, you said you were in the regiment for 4 years. Then you decide to go to the SF side of the house. What was the decision there? Why the move?
Well, it's like regiment. Well, when I was there, it was kind of a progression, right? Like you didn't really homestead there. I mean, you could, but I think most of us wanted to go to the unit, go to CAG, and it was like a process, right? So for me, it was like Ranger Battalion to SF to CAG. That was the course of action that I wanted to take. So I came into the chow hall one day and in 2nd Ranger Battalion, looked around, and I used to know everybody, and I knew like 4 dudes. And I was like, okay, it's time to go.
Time to go. How was the transition for you, and how long did you spend there before
it was
things
good,
changed?
Man. Like, so I didn't stay too much longer after that. A bunch of my buddies were going to CAG, or they were going to fly helicopters so they could go to 160th, or they were going the Special Forces route. And so, shortly thereafter that aha moment, I was probably out 6 months later. I was putting my paperwork in and off and, on to the next thing.
Yeah. So you had mentioned when we were talking beforehand, the operation in Haiti. So I wonder if we could just speak to that briefly. Kind of where were you at the time? What, how old were you? What was that experience like going in?
Yeah, I was like 24 years old. It was in 94. So yeah, it was close to my birthday. Like, seems to be October is like the go to war month in Ranger Battalion. There's a theme here. But anyway, it just, it was exciting times, man. Like we were on the USS America, and we were, had all the assets there, and everybody was ready to go to work. And I think lessons learned from Somalia was that, being on an aircraft carrier is a stable, safe platform to do mission planning and prep. And so then we launched into Las Cayas and grabbed a dude, and that was kind of the end of that. Like, I know Jimmy Carter went in and had conversation with Aristide, and shortly thereafter he just kind of said, okay, I'm not going to play hardball with you guys. There was a couple of guys doing some bad stuff in the Northern Claw of Haiti and Las Cayas, and so we went in there and grabbed that guy. And what was that?
Without getting into any of the operational details, but if you could just, like, 2 years into this, or a couple years into your career here, you're finally going in. Was it an infill on helicopters? Were you jumping in? What was the feeling like going in with that for you?
Felt pretty good.
First
Like
time, yeah.
loading up with your boys, feels really good.
And what was, as you guys went in, as much, and if you can't talk about it, no problem. But as you guys went in, what was your role? Were you breaching? Were you covering? What was your position in that?
So I was a forward observer. So I was a FO. So all my buddies here are like, yeah, Hollen, the freaking FO. So I talked to air assets. Yeah, with my platoon.
While they were going in, you were there with them, kind of.
Yeah.
Almost like the JTAC today, huh?
Yes. Well, yeah, like an ETAC, JTAC kind of a situation. Yeah, so that was my job with my platoon.
And was it kind of what you expected it to be coming out of that mission as you were coming back? Like, I finally did this. I was in. This is what I signed up for. There was no shots fired, So The cool part was nobody got hurt. Everybody came home. And years later, I talked to the battalion surgeon, and I was like, hey, man, like, were you on the Haiti mission? He was like, yeah, Eric. The great thing about that mission was everybody came home, And I was like, yeah, amen, brother. That's for sure.
Because now we got a bunch of brothers buried in Arlington, and we miss their souls.
Yeah.
But the war fight, like that was who they were. That was who they were as men, and that's all they wanted to do, and that's how we identified ourselves and our worth. Yeah.
Did that? Because just being frank, at the time, not many people had gone and seen combat at the time. So coming back from that,
like we had Somalia the year before,
right? And I'm sure within the Ranger community, like that was obviously it was a big deal everywhere, but certainly within the Ranger community.
It was heartbreaking for us 275 guys because we were down in El Paso, Texas, getting ready to go, and we got bumped off the mission at the last minute, so we were all wrecked. Yeah, we were pretty upset about it. But that's just the nature of things. Like we don't make those calls, and when we're young men like that, we think potentially we might be a little more important than we really are.
Yeah, with hindsight,
back,
right?
Yeah,
it's easier to see.
But at the time, it's like such an emotional thing.
Yeah, you just don't want to miss it.
You feel like you got robbed.
If we jump ahead to obviously what happened to you, if you can share the accident, where you were at in your career at the time, and then let's dig into what that was like.
So as I've progressed through the injury, so I've kind of, the verbiage I like to give it is like catastrophic, life-changing injury. And so worst case scenario for me wasn't like fighting and dying in some third world alley somewhere. It was like that. I understood that. The thing that I was afraid of was getting hurt so bad that I couldn't take care of myself or my family or my Ranger buddies or my Special Forces buddies, right? Like, God forbid I couldn't do my job.
And
so that so I used to not be able to talk about this, man, without just breaking down.
You tell me if,
like I would just start bawling, like it took probably 10 years before I could talk about this without getting really emotional.
Are you comfortable talking through what the accident was? Just for
like
context for people.
So for me, I was a part-time farrier. So I was a horseshoer on weekends. When I wasn't deployed, I was working. So I was a trainer, a breeder, and a farrier. So I was working all the time. And so it was a nice way to supplement my income. And I guess avoidance, like through work.
Yeah.
So I had this, like the career progression for me was to go to CAG tryouts. At some point I realized I had a decision to make, like family or job. And so I agonized over that decision for about 6 months, and I realized that I couldn't have it all. Like I couldn't have a daughter that's a squared away kid and be gone all the time. So the selfish side of me was like, well, I want to do what I want to do. And the other part of me, the part of my soul that was connected to my child, at 2.5 years old, and I'm walking around the barn hall with her, and and she's daddy this and horsey that. And I just realized, hey man, I can't do both effectively. So I pulled the plug and got out at 9 years. And then I had a 38-acre horse farm in the Johnson City, Tennessee area. And I had a rough day. I had an old 430 John Deere tractor, no roll bar, none of that. And I was doing some landscaping work, and the drag caught. I was trying to smooth out a bank. As I was going up, the drag caught, pulled the tractor over on top of myself.
And
so I had gotten out. I'd been out almost a year. And I had a conversation with my wife then of, like, I think I made a mistake. Like, I miss my job in special operations. Like, and 2 days later I was paralyzed, and then 6 months later 9/11 kicked off.
Jeez. I don't think there's anybody who listens to this, certainly the vets who listen to this, that haven't had the same inner, kind of come to Jesus meeting about choosing the job or the family.
Yeah.
And myself included, going through that. I would love to still be doing that work, but like my son is recording us today, and we spend way more time together, and the Gold Star families here are a great reminder.
Yeah.
And it's completely fine for people who don't choose that route, and it works for them. But I think everybody can appreciate the burden that it is and how difficult.
Like you deployed.
Yep.
I deployed. I know the struggle.
It is.
Like, yeah, the struggle, like, to not be whistling on the way out the door to go do your job with your boys, but at the same time, you're missing everything at home.
Yeah.
It's like a love-hate relationship, and it's really almost ethereal. It's really hard to put your finger on the spiritual side of it, but it's this huge piece of our soul is connected to the job, but a huge part of our soul and who we are as men is attached to our family too.
Yeah. And if you could, Eric, what was the injury that you sustained, just so that people who are listening can relate?
Yeah, man, I had a sudden stop with a 5,000-pound tractor on top of me. So I had a broken back between L3 and L4, so just right above my sacrum. My diaphragm was ruptured, pelvis was broken, and I had a 22-centimeter tear in my aortic arch, and I didn't bleed out. So that's a whole nother conversation. Like, a lot of stuff happens in the 2 hours post initial impact of the tractor, and then the subsequent 6 months. The first 6 months of my injury and recovery, a lot of godly, well, really the next year and a half, there was a lot going on.
All right.
So I don't know what your spiritual side is or what we can focus on, but that's some shit went down, man.
So I would love to dig into this. And I want, because you brought up faith a few times now. Were you religious before that?
Well, I went to Catholic school, but I wouldn't say I was religious.
As did I.
Like, I didn't buy into like, if you're not Catholic, you don't get in. So I kind of was like, well, my dad's like Protestant. My mom's Presbyterian. Dad really didn't go to church very much. Went because I think he had to, because my mom said, let's go. And then Catholic school was in my lane because I was a little rowdy as a kid. I felt the discipline would be good for me, and I think it probably was.
And then sounds like it may have taken on a totally different meaning after this incident.
So, well, so there's no battlefield atheists. Right.
Let's keep going though. Sorry.
Yeah, man. So
there's no battlefield atheist, which is true.
Yeah. So when I needed help, man, like I said earlier, the Lord's always been like super obvious in my life. It isn't a subtle message. It's a hard hit in the head. Like, Eric, left turn, Ranger. So I'm trying to understand how to put there's so much to my story. It's hard for me to get it all articulated,
Yeah.
right? Like I've begun to work on that layering process. And so initial injury, but prior to that, for about, I'd say over a year, I had kind of a looming sense of doom. And I don't know how to put my finger on it. I don't know how to explain it except that I felt just a sense of something coming.
Wasn't right. Yeah.
Something's coming, man. Like, I don't know what it is, but I know something's en route.
Stay hero. And again, Eric, that's if I got the timeline right, almost like the 6 months before you exit the military to the 6 months after, right? So
so here's the cool part. Like, so yeah, prior to getting out, I had a sense of something was coming. But after the injury, it was gone.
Wow.
Gone.
So again, we had just a tactical pause with another aircraft coming in. Eric, if we're talking, you talk about this sense of looming, impending doom coming.
It really, it was kind of unique because I'd never really felt anything like that before.
I wonder if after that, the week or two after that injury, the way that you felt at the time, could you try to put that into words? Very few people can understand it, but I want to set this up for some other discussion.
Yeah, so the message I'd like to send is like, hey man, there's a whole bunch of guys that have gone through Walter Reed and Bethesda and these military medical centers with catastrophic injuries similar to mine or worse, right? Like, I shot on the U.S. Paralympic team for 12 years and I saw guys that were hurt a lot worse than me, right? With the Warrior Games and things like that. So upon impact, like, I saw a blinding flash of light, right? I felt excruciating pain that was overwhelming. And then I lost a sense of time. So I had a 5,000-pound tractor smash me into the ground. And so the orientation of the tractor is north-south and I'm east-west, right? So somehow I get out from underneath a 5,000-pound tractor. I don't know how that happened. The next thing I remember is waking up and my head is orientated towards the back tires, which are upside down, right in the air. And my feet are down towards the front end of the tractor. And my back is to the tractor and I'm like this, like I'm laying in bed.
Wow.
And I have no sense of time or how long I was out or anything. I just know I woke up and I wasn't in shock. I did my primary, secondary survey on myself. I knew my pelvis was broke because I was like, oops, something doesn't feel right. My breathing was a little off. I felt some pressure. I didn't understand that my diaphragm was ruptured. I thought I had a ruptured lung. And so I tried to stand up, and I felt this weight. Like I was a big, strong guy, and I felt a weight. I couldn't move. Like I couldn't lift myself up. And this is going to sound crazy, but I heard a voice that wasn't my internal monologue that said, Eric, if you try to move again, you'll die. Well, I didn't know I had a 22 centimeter tear in my aortic arch. So anyway, I was like, oh, okay. All right, I'm going to stay still. And so I did deep breathing, relaxation drills, and I had a conversation with the Lord. And I was there for a couple hours in the dirt waiting for hopefully my wife to come check on me before she left to go to work. Because the level of injury, the trauma I sustained, like I wouldn't make it through the night. The docs don't know how I made it at all. So that's another story. We'll get to that in a minute. This is the part that I want to share with guys that have suffered similar injury or maybe they haven't suffered it yet and it's coming down the pipe. I don't know. But I said out loud, like I'm talking to you right now, Ryan, like, hey man, hey Lord, I'm tying a knot in the end of this rope and holding on, and I need you to stay with me. And I felt a presence, and I don't know if it was like my ancestors that had died or the Lord, the Spirit of the Lord was with me. It sounds crazy to talk about it like this, but I felt a presence, and I felt safe, and I felt like the man I am was good to go. Yeah, so the piece of laying in the dirt, coming to Jesus, like there's no battlefield atheist. Like I knew I was hurt bad. I didn't know how bad, and I knew I needed help. And so I said out loud, like, Lord, I'm going to tie a knot in the end of this rope and hold on, and I need you to hang out with me until help gets here. And I felt a presence. Now, I don't, like I said earlier, and I know I'm probably backtracking a little, but I felt this spiritual presence of the Holy Spirit, or however you want to shape it. But I knew I wasn't by myself. And I also knew if this is the last day I have on earth, I'm good. Like I've made good choices when nobody was looking. I'm proud of the man I am. And if this is my time to go, roger that, I'm good. I'll go meet the command sergeant major in the sky and report, Ranger Hollen report, and sergeant major. I'm good.
So I know that we will get into this, but there are darker days ahead in your story. And it sounds like in this catastrophic moment, you're thinking very clearly, positively, I got this, I'm going to make it, or I'm asking for help to make it, and I'm comfortable if I have to leave.
Yeah.
If you had to...
I didn't feel fear. I felt warm, safe. And I was hurt really bad. I wasn't in shock. When the paramedics finally got there, I was talking to them just like I am to you right now.
And if you had to then, without jumping ahead, I just wanted, if we had to like do a story arc of going from a good place to a dark place, from the moment that injury happens, and even if we have to fast forward several years, I know it gets bad, but how long does it take before that starts to go downhill for you? So
as we're like, I think what I'd like to address is the looming sense of doom that I have.
Yeah.
Right. So as the tractor's flipping over, it's a bright green and yellow John Deere tractor. Had been restored, is like brand new, and the tractor like was as dark as it was, as black the black you could perceive. I don't even know how to explain it, except it was a dark, menacing presence. And I had a moment of thought that was like, this is going to sound a little weird, but I don't know how else to say it. But I had this fear of, this is the test. This is the demon. This is the monster that's been looming over me. Like in the blink of an eye, I was like, the tractor was black, and I felt a sense of doom and fear for the first time in my life. I've been scared lots of times. This felt like the monster's after me, kind of a sense of things. I don't know how to explain it. Other than that, the impact of the tractor, the sense of doom left immediately after the injury. Now, the Lord showed up, and I asked for help, and I got help, and I laid in the dirt for a couple hours before help came. So I had time to lay there and contemplate things and try to be quiet in my head and deep breathe and relax. So, I didn't know that my aortic arch was about to rupture. Right. I had no clue that was even going on. But I felt the presence of the Lord with me. That dark presence was gone. Now, like 6 months after injury, once I realized that I was never going to walk again, then I was suicidal for a few months, and some amazing things happened that alleviated that for me too. But there's a little more kind of divine intervention that I want to address. So help gets there, paramedics get on site. They're like, hey, this guy's mechanism of injury, we don't really understand what happened. He's telling us, but the head paramedic was like, we better get the life flight here. Because if they'd have loaded me up in the ambulance and the bus and bounced me through the pasture field and down the road, like my aortic arch would have just blown up. So the bird's coming in, get to the hospital. I'm about to go into surgery and they're going to put my back together. I could flex my legs and my calves and my feet. And I was laying on the gurney and about to go into surgery, and my wife noticed something under my pec, like my left pec, did something weird. And she was like, hey, you guys better check this out. And I was conscious for this. So I heard the conversation and everything. So they send me back into the CAT scan, and my aorta looks like a balloon when you squeeze it. It's about to go. So the cool part is, they put me out. I don't wake up for a week. They put me in a coma, medical induced coma to kind of let my body bounce back and all of that. So when I come to, I'm intubated. I look at the nurse, and I'm the guy that's sitting in the ER with me in the intensive care. And I'm like, hey man, my family's not coming in here to see me intubated and all this. I don't remember how to break the seal. I know there's an air bladder in here. I need to crack that seal and bust that thing so I can pull this shit out. And he's like, Eric, and I was like, no man, I'm good. Like, I'm awake. I'm good to go. And so I freaking did all that shit, pulled the intubation tube out, and I was good to go after that. Physically.
Yep.
The mental side, that's to be determined here and over the next 9 months. So the surgeon that saved my life, that fixed my aorta, was a visiting surgeon from Johns Hopkins, who was like the head cardiac surgeon, and he was visiting to do a medical rotation with East Tennessee State's medical school because he was friends with the president of the university. They went to med school together or something like that. So the doc that saved my life was Dr. Forrest-Guerra. And he came in to my room. I'd been awake for about a week and a half. And he said, Eric, I saved your life, but you're never going to walk again. And I said, hey, doc, that's cool and everything, but I'm going to walk out of this hospital. I was like, you can go pound sand. And I said it a little bit rougher than that, but that was the message I conveyed. And he grinned and he said, you're going to be all right. He said, I'll tell you this. I've never seen anybody survive an aortic tear like you had. It just doesn't happen.
The impending feel of doom that left, right, when that happened. Nobody knows why that is. Have you ever given thought to like why it may have left at that time?
Yeah, the test was like the impact was like, okay, man, like you think you've done hard stuff before? Well, guess what? The test is getting ready to happen, and that I don't know the impending presence or the doom feeling, but it vanished after the impact of the tractor. I never felt that sense of doom again, like something's coming my way, and there's kind of like this evil presence kind of feeling to it. I don't even know. It sounds crazy to talk about it, but that's kind of how it felt to me. That's how it felt to me. There's no kind of, it just felt malevolent. And then once the blinding flash of light and the impact of the tractor and the explosion of pain that occurred in my head, but that doom and gloom feeling was gone. Now when I came home 9 months later from the hospital, and I realized my legs are shrinking. I have bowel and bladder issues. I'm never gonna walk again. Now I'm thinking about smoke checking myself. Like I'm like, the next phase of this progression was I'm going to bed every night. For the first 30 nights I'm home on my horse farm, and I'm asking the Lord. I'd go to bed every night saying, Lord, this rucksack I'm carrying is too heavy. Like if this is the rest of my life, I don't think I can do it. I need help. And I was looking at my 45. Like, okay, I'm not going to live my life like this. So
I don't want to interrupt your train of thought.
It's okay.
I wanted to ask, I mean, it's a pivotal moment. I've talked to several folks who have been in a situation where they had the weapon nearby and are feeling like that. Not the same scenario, obviously, but for the reasons. What was it that kept you from taking
the step?
Yeah.
Well, that's a great question. So we had a 3-day toad strangling gully washer storm. Like, they had to fly people, medevac people out of their homes and things like that. We were up on the high ground, right? Like don't build your fighting position in the low ground, Ranger. That's just a bad call. So I didn't. So we were good to go for that piece. And at the end of that storm, my wife was riding one of my horses out in our 38-acre hay pasture field, and she found a balloon message, right, with a business card on it. Well, the business card was from a church in western Missouri, and it had some scripture on the back of the business card, and it said, if you find this, this balloon message, please contact this church in western Missouri and let us know, right? So they could put a pin on the map to see where their balloons went for the kids, for the youth group. I still have the business card, the balloon message. I didn't realize it. My ex-wife saved it.
Yeah.
And so now that, we're having this discussion, I have tangible proof. Well, it gets better. Okay. So the balloon message comes. That's great. Okay, cool. So the pastor's father calls the house about 2 weeks later, and he had been injured on the same model John Deere tractor as me, doing the same type of work, and broke his back between the same two vertebrae. And he had a brief conversation with me like, hey, Eric, I was injured and paralyzed 6 years ago. It's hard, but it's going to be okay. So, my simple way of looking at life was like, all right, the Lord heard my prayer, and he was like, hey, Ranger Hollen, ruck up. You're going to be okay. And I was good to go after that. Like, that was my divine intervention message. Like, what are the odds of that happening at all, let alone with the backstory? And I was good, man. I was never suicidal again after that.
Wow. If I could ask, that discussion that you had with the pastor, not many folks who come back from combat have PTSD and they can relate to one another. What you've gone through is a much smaller group of people, right?
Yes.
Fewer people have gone through that. Do you think somebody who had not experienced that same type of injury and trauma?
So that's the balloon message.
And actually, I'm going to put this, if it's all right with you, and you'll share it, I'll put this on the video so people can see it.
I can send you the picture.
Yeah, I would love it.
Yeah, it's legit. Go ahead. So I wanted to show you, like, hey man, that's not a made up. I feel blessed to have tangible evidence to say, hey man, this happened. It's verifiable.
Do you think that you could have received that same advice from somebody who hadn't been through this, or the fact that the pastor had the same type of catastrophic, life-changing incident?
The mechanism of injury was the same.
Right.
So to me, the way I perceived it then, and I still do, was the Lord heard me. He sent this message to me with the context of the backstory to be like, hey, Ranger Hollen, I hear you. God saying, Eric, I'm taking a minute out of my day. Like, I'm creating universes and life and stuff. You're going to be okay, Ranger. Like, ruck up and get to work. And that's how I took it. And I was good after that. Like, that was a paradigm shift for me. One of many to come. But that was my validation in my mind. That was something outside of my own internal monologue that I feel like I received a divine message that was sent to me. Now, whether that's the case or not, I don't know, but what are the odds?
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, it came like 750 miles to me.
Just before we jump to, I think, kind of the greatness that you go on to in the shooting career and what comes next, for people who are serving right now, if you're a vet or you're active duty, I've heard other people say, just like you did, you weren't worried about dying when you were serving. You were worried about something like this happening, right? Like that is really one of the worst things that could happen.
Like a catastrophic life-changing injury.
Yes.
Like, okay, like you got your legs blown off by an RPG or an IED or a VBED or whatever the mechanism of injury is. Like, it's not necessarily fighting and dying with your boys. It's like getting hurt so bad that you can't function at a high level.
Right.
At a high level, not just like getting through your day, but we set the bar like really high for
you're
ourselves.
already in the pinnacle.
Yeah,
elite group.
like I wouldn't at the apex, but I was working towards the goal.
Yeah, and for people, if you were speaking to somebody who's in great shape and at that level and is worried about that, obviously you can't be there when that moment comes. But if they are worried about that moment and they go into it, now that you've gone through it, how would you tell them to take that on the few moments after to the few months after?
Well, just tap into your strengths. All right, ask for help. Seek out help. And if it isn't going your way, like you gotta, that's a really good question, Ryan. Like it's hard for me to put that into words. So what I would say to a guy, who maybe has a sense of something's coming or not, and something just comes down the pipeline and hits you hard. Right. So, reach out to me. I'm 20 years into this thing now, and I wouldn't trade the injury for all the good it's done to me. So what I mean by that is the only way I would trade the last 20 years is if I could take all the experience and knowledge I've learned and put it in the body I had before I got hurt. Like if it was one or the other, I won't trade. Like I wouldn't go back.
Yeah.
Because I've grown, like I've stretched, I've grown through pain.
If we take from the moment where you talk to the pastor, you kind of overcome that dark spell at the time, you don't have the tendencies again as you described it. How long is it until you say, all right, I'm going to go on this path and become an Olympian, basically? What took you there? What drove you that direction?
That's a great question. So are you sure you aren't trained up in therapy? Like
I'm not.
I
was in the CIA,
right?
So I feel like
Yeah.
I have been trained in
So you got a little inside scoop. So I knew about Paralympic sport. I knew after 18 months of as hard a rehab as I could do and not making an inch of gain for the first time in my life, I didn't make a gain. Like I trained as hard as I could and I got nothing back. And so I was like, okay, man, 18 months into this rehab and braces, leg braces and parallel bars and everything at home and working my behind off and no progress. I hit a wall.
You even said growing up, like physicality was your...
It's a strength, man.
Yeah.
Like that part was easy for me.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I didn't have challenges or anything, but the physical part of my life was fairly easy for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was struggling with how to define myself post injury, and I knew there was Paralympic sport out there, and all I knew was horses and guns. I was a 18 Bravo, I was a weapons guy, I was a Ranger, so I was like, okay, well, what do I know? I know how to shoot. I know how to mess around with guns a little bit, and I know horses. Well, I can't do the horseshoeing thing. I can't be a farrier anymore. I can't really do the equine side of things anymore. So I plugged myself into gunsmithing school to USA Shooting. I was in gunsmithing school in Denver area, Colorado, and I knew the Olympic Training Center was in Colorado Springs. I'd been stationed in Colorado Springs at Fort Carson in 10th Group. And so one day I just drove down to USA Shooting and rolled in there and introduced myself to whoever was working in the office and said, "Hey, I think I can shoot with your guys." And I'll never forget this, man. I don't remember the young lady's name. She was an intern. But she kind of cocked the eyebrow and gave me the, "Yeah, sure you do."
Yeah.
Right. And so it was so cool, man. And then it was on, right? So so I went in on the range and I checked it out. They entertained me for a minute. And Dan Jordan was a collegiate national champion and had broke his back on Denali, Mount McKinley, and he was at the University of Fairbanks as a rifle shooter on their rifle team. And he had broke his back. He was like 8 years into his injury at that point, and he was out of town. He was competing somewhere in Europe or who knows where. And he was getting ready for the Athens games in 2004. So the rifle coach at that time said, "Hey, Eric," I think it was Dave Johnson was the coach. And he said, "Hey, just come back when Dan comes back. He'll be back next weekend. Come down and meet Dan." And so I did. And so I met Dan. He's in a chair. I'm in a chair. He's a elite level athlete. He's been an able-bodied athlete. We had all these things in common. And so he gave me a rifle, and I shot 10-meter rifle. Well, I don't know if you know much about Olympic riflery, but it's a period dot on a typewriter is a millimeter dot. Well, that's the 10 ring at 33 feet. Jeez. Right? So I'm shooting at the I got aperture sights, so round target, 2 round sights, and I line everything up, and I scare the black. Like I got leaner 7s all the way around, right? I can't get in the black. And I don't think I shot an 8, like that's a long ways out from the 10 ring.
Let alone a 10.
Right. So, but they gave me a pistol, and out of 20 shots, I put 8 to 10 in the 10 ring. And they're like, "Hey, you shoot pretty good." And I was like, "Well, it's iron sights, it's like this, front sight, rear sight, everything lines up, line everything up, pull the trigger, got it." Yeah. So they said, I went to lunch with Dan, and because he was in a chair, and he said to me, "Eric, like this injury, if you work it hard enough, could be the best thing that ever happened to you." And because he was an elite athlete before he got hurt, he's a Paralympic athlete after, and he's in a wheelchair, and he was 8 years into his injury. I heard what he said. I heard it. I was like, "You're crazy." I said, "I don't know, man. I think USADA's in your future. Like they might need to drug test you." So that's USADA's the anti-doping agency that all U.S. athletes have to, perform to that standard. So I kind of kid with Dan about that still to this day.
Did you have to prove to him that you could get in, or was it that first round of shooting he could just see your technique?
No.
He could see you had it.
I didn't have to prove much to him. I shot with him quite a few times moving forward. I was in gunsmithing school. I'd come down on weekends and shoot as much as I could, and I shot every morning for 2 hours before class at the Arvada pistol range. It's an indoor, kind of funky, old-timey indoor shooting range. And so I worked my ass off at it, man. I wore a gun out. I had an older model side cocker, kind of spring-loaded, 10-meter, not even compressed air. It was like pre-64. I don't even remember the model. I just know I wore the bluing off that thing shooting it. I shot it for 2 years, maybe, year and a half. And I just wore it out and shot every day before class. That was my routine: shooting, class, and then the gym.
And you mentioned, as we were talking offline, it took a few years to make the team, right?
Yeah, it took 3
years to make it.
Yes.
And so when you started trying, were you thinking like, I'm going to get on that team that is my goal.
That was my goal.
After talking to Dan,
yes.
basically.
Yeah, I knew I could do it.
And I'm not familiar with the selection process for that, but I'm assuming you have to qualify.
So I do. I know it.
Yeah. So please, like, what is it that after 3 years, they were like, all right, you're ready to go.
Yeah.
You got this slot here.
Yeah, I just shoot a gold medal score from the previous games to make the team in a World Cup.
Jeez.
So the cool part, so there's another piece of this story that is kind of faith-based. So I'd only told one of my closest Ranger buddies that I had even been hurt.
Wow.
And he spread the word, and he had come back from a deployment. Rich Kanoth, one of my best friends, and we were in Alpha Company 275 together, 2nd Ranger Battalion together, and he went flight school at Fort Rucker, and then went to fly while I was in the Q course. He was flying for the 18th Airborne Corps or the 82nd, I can't remember which, but he was doing his initial flight time, right? They got to do a certain amount of flight hours, certain amount of time under nods before they can go to 160th tryouts. So Rich and I are located in the, Fort Bragg at the same time. We're working out together at lunch. And anyway, super close. And I'm close with all my Ranger buddies, really. But after injury, I was ashamed of myself. Like somehow I'd screwed up and hurt myself. And now I'm broke and I'm that guy and I'm a mess. I'm a fucking mess, man. Rich came to the hospital 2 months into injury. If that, maybe 6 weeks. He'd been deployed somewhere and came home and came to see me. Yeah, I'll never forget it. And we were both wrecked. I think he was wrecked more than me.
Can we dive in just a little bit to that? The shame that you felt, like, where does that come from? Because just knowing you, I'm sure if one of your Ranger buddies said that they were dealing with this, I don't think anybody would hold it against them. Like, where did that come from?
I don't know, man. I just thought, my internal monologue was like, oh, you dumbass. Like, how could you do this to yourself? Like, you did this to yourself.
Yeah.
Like, it didn't happen in the war fight. It didn't happen based on someone else's decision-making process. It was all just me on my farm tractor doing something I shouldn't have been doing. And I had an accident that ended up breaking my body in half and crushing my soul. Like, the analogy I use, and I've said this before, it was like pushing a ball underwater. The further you push it down, the harder it pushes back. Eventually, like, my personality came back to the surface, right? With force. But it took a while, man. Like, it took a while.
Is that some of the advice? I think earlier you were saying to open up about it. Like, if you were advising someone else in this position,
ask for help.
Tell more of your friends.
Yeah, ask for help. Don't be ashamed. Don't let the injury define you as an individual. And you're going to go through pain, man. Like, it's going to define you for a minute. It might be a couple years. Like, for me, it took a while. So the cool part, the reason I kind of branched off onto that train of thought was simply because I'm in gunsmithing school. I'm working my behind to make the shooting team. And I get on a plane to go back to Tennessee to see my daughter. My marriage is not working out, right? Like, the injury, and it's very seldom will someone suffer kind of a catastrophic injury like this and their marriage stay intact. It's like the death of a kid. Like, it just fundamentally changes the nature of the relationship to the point where it's overwhelming for both parties. So I'm in Denver International Airport. I'm going down Terminal B to catch my flight. And my team sergeant, my SF team, is coming this way in the airport.
Completely by chance.
By random. Random, but not random.
Yeah, right.
So, okay, now my team sergeant sees me. I can't turn around.
Yeah.
There's no hiding it now. And he's like, Eric, like, what happened, brother? And I was like, Mike, I had a tractor accident. I broke my back. And he's like, we're going to Key West for a dive requal. We'll be back in 2 weeks. You're coming to the house. And I was like, Roger that.
Yeah. Can't say no.
So I go back to Tennessee. Those guys go down to Key West, do their thing, and come back. And I go back. I go to Mike's house. He helps me tune my resume up. I'm still in gunsmithing school, and he gets me a job with L3 Communications. I go to Fort Belvoir to tune their guns up to punch out for 1st Infantry Division to go to Afghanistan. So I'm there for 6 weeks. I made a good chunk of change, and it's Thanksgiving window of time, and I go to Walter Reed on Thanksgiving Day. I just felt this, okay, man, Walter Reed's right here. There's dudes coming home hurt. You need to go. So I did. I went on one of the wards, rolling in my chair, and just said to the head nurse, hey, my name's Eric Hollen. I was an Army guy. If there's anybody that could benefit from my company or my conversation, please show me the way. And she did. So I go into a room with, there's a Marine there, which is kind of weird at an Army hospital, but there's so many dudes coming home hurt. They're just putting people in beds. So this kid was a pitcher for Clemson, right? Went in after 9/11, gave up his college scholarship. His mom has his room decorated with his guitar and all his memorabilia, trophies, pictures, everything. So the kid's bilateral amputee, so below the knee, both legs are missing, spinal cord injury, and in a coma and hadn't woke up yet. And so I just introduced myself to his mom, and she just talked about her son for a couple hours, and I just sat and listened. And at the end of it, once she'd kind of processed all the stuff that she was worried, scared, and afraid of, and we were both in tears, and I told her my recovery to that point, what it looked like, just like we've kind of talked about, just up to 2 years into my injury. And she looked at me and said, Eric, you're the answer to my prayer. Well, I just got that balloon message, man, 6 months earlier. I understood what that meant. That was hugely impactful for me. So I finished the contracting job up, went back to Colorado, finished school, started night class for a college degree to get a clinical degree to work with behavioral health. Right. So now I'm a licensed clinical social worker. Mm-hmm. I got a master's degree. I don't know how I pulled that off, but I did. Fake it till you make it, brother.
All right.
So that, was just another piece of, if I hadn't bumped into Mike,
you wouldn't have been in that area.
Right. And I wouldn't have got the contracting job, and then I wouldn't have went to Walter Reed, and I wouldn't have met this woman. And so the Lord was like, bam, Ranger, left turn.
Yeah. You were like her balloon message, right?
Yes.
At that point. Damn. All right.
I know, man.
How
I know, right? When I tell this story, it just blows my mind.
Yeah. It's special.
It's not subtle.
It is.
Yeah.
And at the time, you're getting your master's degree at night. You're also honing your shooting skills, right?
Yeah. So my daughter's in Tennessee. I made enough money on that 6-8 weeks of contracting that I was good to go for a few months, and I packed all my stuff, finished gunsmithing school, finished the semester, packed all my stuff, moved back to Tennessee to raise my daughter, be a dad. I had wrapped my head around the wheelchair, the injury. I was no longer I was just broke, man. My soul was crushed. I was just lost for the first time in my life. I couldn't orientate my cusbus. It was just going in a circle. I felt like I'm in the weeds I don't know what to do, how to do it. Everything seems immense, overwhelming, no direction. I'm just holding on for dear life.
And I'm curious what it was like once you got back to that pinnacle level of competition, right? Because you were in that with the Ranger Battalion, SF, and then you're around shooters.
That's a great question. So I'd shot well enough at the Olympic Training Center with USA Shooting. It was probably 6 months. And I was down there every chance I got. And the pistol coach at the time was kind of an ass. So I'd drive an hour and a half to get down there. And like, if he felt like shouldn't be there, like he'd kick everybody off the range and turn the lights out on me.
Jeez.
Yeah, he was a dick. So I'd be like, well, okay, that was freaking great. So that just pissed me off even more. Then I was like, okay, it's on. Like, yeah, I'm gonna use this.
I'm gonna do this.
Yeah, I used it for fuel. So he didn't know he was motivating me. I was like, okay, man, you're not a special operations guy. You're just some pistol shooter. What have you done with your life? You know, I was angry. Like I flipped that switch and focused that effort and started chasing the score. And so I packed all my stuff, and one of the coaches had shot at Eastern Kentucky on their rifle team, Dave Johnson. He was cool. And Dave said, hey, man, you're from Johnson City, Tennessee. The East Tennessee State had a riflery team. They still got a range. You can train there and go to school and be a freaking dad. Do your job. What are you doing?
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, cool. So I packed up my stuff and hauled ass back home and raised my kid and went back to school at East Tennessee State. Well, not back, but I signed up for college there, got my undergrad there, and shot my behind off every day and went to class. And my daughter worked out in the gym with me, like 6 years old. She's like, Dad, what are you doing to me? I'm 6. I'm like, I don't care. You're working out with your dad.
Yeah.
You're going to learn some skills. Yeah. So this is cool, right? So there's more to this story. So Colonel Mark Mirage is the ROTC commander there, and his first sergeant, I don't remember the guy's name, 101st guy. So I'd be on the range shooting, and the ROTC guys would come in, and I'd just be like, hey man, I'm training too. Is it cool if I just set my stuff up next to you guys and train? And they were like, yeah, sure. And I was drilling it with this old broken down POS of a pistol. You know, I mean, I was shooting holes in my target, like 30 rounds, like tight groups. And I had some drills set up. And so the first sergeant had enough shooting experience to be like, I think he shot IPSC or IDPA or something. And he's like, holy crap, this dude's shooting pretty good. So he talks to Mark, right? Unbeknownst to me. And Mark talks to me, you know, we're like out at the Burger King on campus or something. And he's like, hey man, what's your deal? And I was like, well, here's my deal. Blah, 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 Ranger Battalion group. And he's like, okay. And so I didn't know it, but he talked to the ROTC cadets, and they had a kind of a slush fund. And so they gave me $3,500, enough to buy, like the pistol I needed to compete with was $2,000 at that time. And they gave me some travel money to get to matches. So I took that, and my score jumped 30 points overnight. So I was shooting like 555s out of 600. I jumped to 575s. Jeez. Like from one gun to the next. It was that dramatic of a change. It was just the system I was using. I shot it as best as it could shoot. Yeah. I just thought it was me.
Level up.
Like, right? Like it's always operator error.
Yep.
So the East Tennessee State's ROTC program sponsored me without sponsoring me, right?
Yeah,
like
they gave you that chance.
And then I hit the bricks, man, and I shot a funding score 18 months later. But the fight, the thing that I loved about shooting was you're just up there all by your lonesome, man. It's you and your gun and your head and your thoughts and learning. So I could shoot the scores in practice, but when I'd get in the match in competition, the score became an obstacle, right? So the analogy I use, like not too many, like our shooting sports aren't talked about. You don't really see them. Maybe at the Olympics they'll show some stuff related to the shooting sports, but not very much. So the fight the part that I had to learn how to navigate was focus on this shot. I got to do 60 of these, but this shot right now is the only shot that matters. and to still my mind and focus on the process of shooting the shot. So hold control, aiming control, trigger control, breathing control, follow through. So one of those steps was a little bit out of process, but that's the scheme of maneuver for me, was like these 5 steps of shooting an effective shot process will result in the goal, which is the score. Well, it took me almost 18 months to learn how to manage that. So meaning I'd shoot my first 30 shots in the match and be world-class scores. I'm shooting 95s, 96s out of 100 points, strings. And then I'd realize, holy smoke, I'm on fire. And as soon as I thought that thought, then I started chasing the score and I'd lose it. The wheels would come off.
Yeah.
And so I'm at a winter air gun match in Colorado Springs at USA Shooting. I'm traveling. I'm robbing Peter to pay Paul to get there. And Coach Ray Ariando was an '88 Olympian rapid fire pistol shooter. And he watched me shoot, and he came up to me after the match and said, Eric, I'm at the AMU. My name's Coach Ray Ariando. I want to help you make the team. Come down to the AMU every chance you get, and I'll coach you.
Wow.
And so I was a 6-hour drive from East Tennessee, Johnson City to Fort Benning. And I drove that every chance I had, every long weekend. And I'd sleep at a buddy's house. I'd sleep in the cheapest goddamn hotel I could find, whatever it took. I'd stay at a friend's house. And that's how I did it. So 18 months into the injury, or 18 months into the funding, I shot in 2006 at a World Cup at Fort Benning at the Army Marksmanship Unit. I shot the funding score I needed to make the team. It took 3 years.
Wow.
3 years of working. I shot every day for a minimum of 2 hours a day, 6-7 days a week at least.
So if we jump then to the time where you're shooting in the Olympics, what was that feeling like?
So there's no way to prepare for that day. Like I shot for 8 years so I had 8 years of work that boiled down to 2 matches, 10 meter and 50 meter pistol. There was no way to prepare for the pressure, the expectation. The gold medal is right there. I shoot good enough to win. The distraction of the event was overwhelming. So like I'm in my hold. My hold's very still. I have a really, it's almost a detriment. So I could see my hold get very small, and I just would get on the trigger just enough to push it. And then I'd push my shot into the 8 ring. It was a 10 ring hold, easy. Yeah. In both of my events, and I'd medaled in World Cups, I had podiumed like numerous times. I don't know, 8-10 times. I wasn't on the podium every time, but at least 1 out of 3. Jeez. I was in the fight all the time. But that day, man, there was just, I couldn't do it. Like I knew my headspace wasn't right. I knew there was the wheels came off. There was nothing I could do about it. The amazing thing was, so my last string, my 50 to 60 shot string, I shot a 97. So that's only 3 shots out of the 10 ring. So 7 10s, right? So, but the thing of it was, I knew I had paid attention to my score. I knew where I was at, and I had messed it up so bad that I knew I was done. And then I could relax and shoot. Relax.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jeez.
So the cool part of this made me think of another piece of something I missed in this conversation that I wanted to address. So the ROTC side, the making the shooting team side. There's something in there that's important. I can't remember what it was now.
Well, maybe. Did you end up going back to the Olympics?
So I shot one time. 2012 was my shot. 2016 was in Rio. I had just about finished grad school. I needed to get to work. And so I continued to shoot, but not at the level that I had leading up. Like I had to get to work, man. Like I'm broke.
Yep.
Like I got student loan debt.
Yeah.
I got a kid to raise. There's all these things going on, and I continued to compete, but my focus had shifted. But I was a good enough shooter to still play.
Got it. So
I got
go
it.
For it.
Thanks, man. So the paradigm shift, right? Like this is the piece that really just, I was talking about it to Jeff Walker, who was my 18 Delta in 2nd Battalion, 10th Group. And we were going to have coffee, and I was like, Jeff, this paradigm shift for me didn't just happen overnight. It was like 4 years into my injury. I'm at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. I'm coming out of strength and conditioning. I just had a great workout, and I'd shot well that morning. I'm feeling good. And Jesse Beckham, he was one of the bobsled members for sled 3, for bobsled team 3. So Jesse's coming out of the gym. I'm coming out of the gym, and he's like, "Hey, Eric, man, how you competing? Like, how you representing your country? Are you doing your job?"
Wow.
And I was like, "Yeah, bro, I'm crushing it. Like, I'm podium, and not more times than not, but every other time, I'm earning my keep." Yeah. And that's when I realized, I was like, "Holy smoke, man! I'm the only one that sees the chair. Like, nobody else sees it.
That's
like,
cool.
here's an able-bodied Olympic athlete who's a bobsledder, who's like, hey, man, like, how you doing?
Yeah. How are you competing?
Right.
Nothing about.
No, he didn't care. Like, can you walk?
Damn.
And that's when I was like, well, shoot. Like, everybody else is just looking like Eric Hollen. Yeah, dude, you're representing your country in the Paralympics, right? Like, that's a big deal. They don't just let you.
No.
They don't just let you become a resident athlete at the Olympic Training Center. Like, you can't buy your way in there. That's when that paradigm shift like completely shifted into place. Like, I was like, I'm the only one that sees the injury. Why am I carrying this around?
That brings up a question I wanted to ask, and I don't want to take up too much of your time here, Eric, but this one in particular, and if this takes us on a negative direction, it's no problem. We'll skip it. Is there something that you would say to people who do not have this type of injury that just bothers you? Because I would imagine, like, you see the chair, but just what you said, somebody else looks at you and doesn't see it. It must feel like that's how it should be.
You're almost like a mind reader. That's a great question. So I got a really good answer for that. And this is a great example. So I just finished competing for my country in London in 2012 with the U.S. Paralympic team. General Martin Dempsey, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, came and watched me shoot. Like, that was awesome. I'm on the plane coming home, didn't meet the standard in my mind at all. So I'm kind of like, I feel bipolar. I'm like super proud that I did it and super disappointed in myself at the same time. I'm like happy and sad, right? So I go to we land in Dulles in DC, and getting ready to get off the plane. The plane's taxiing, and the pilot comes on and says, "Oh, and by the way, Eric Hollen, U.S. Paralympic USA shooting team member, just competed for his country in London Paralympics and finished 14th and 24th in the world in his 2 events." Whole plane blows up. It was great. Get off the plane, rolling through the airport, and a guy comes up to me and says, "Hey, man, like, you're in a wheelchair. It's really good to see you out." I just got back from London competing for my country, and this dude's like, Olympics. "Hey, man, really good to see like a dude like you out in a wheelchair traveling around doing stuff." Wow. I went in the bathroom and just cried.
Did you?
I just bawled. I was like, I wanted to throat punch that guy.
Yeah.
I was like, what do you know, man? But he was just trying to be nice,
He was.
like in his way of seeing the world. And I'm like, dude, I just crushed my injury. I just represented my country. Like, I've just
you went
reached
through.
all the goals that I had set for myself, right? So it makes me tear up just talking about it. Man.
So
yeah, that happened.
God, and the advice then is just like, don't see the chair, right? It's
it does. So the message that I want to convey, like the reason I really get, and I would just appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about this, Ryan, today, is like the message I want to send out is I don't care what your injury is. Like if you have a PT diagnosis or PTSD diagnosis, whatever you want to call it, however you want to shape it, depression, anxiety, a physical limitation, whatever that is, like it's a choice to allow that to define you as an individual. And I just fundamentally feel that if I can share my message as a message of hope and inspiration, like, hey, if I can do it, anybody can. And don't let the injury define you.
Yeah.
That's the message I really want to send. That was what I struggled with. And that's what took me the route I took, is because I was a special operations member. I got hurt. I got crushed, figuratively and literally. And then I was able to work my way up to reestablish a bar that was equal or maybe exceeded anything I had done as an able-bodied guy in my entire life. And now I wouldn't trade the injury.
So you've answered one of the questions I like to ask everyone. I will modify it slightly, but there are two more questions. One is, and I've never interviewed an Olympian, so I'm going to modify this one also. Was there something you carried with you when you were in combat that had, and when I say in combat or when you were shooting in the Olympics or at that level, that had sentimental value, good luck, something that you needed to make sure you have with you?
No.
Just always.
No.
Focus.
I didn't have any a little good luck charm, or I didn't have anything like that. I had the American flag sewn on the back of my wheelchair, but no, I didn't carry anything with me.
That's a fair answer.
Yeah.
And then the last one, and again, you've touched on this, but you've been through more than anybody I've talked to. Both what you did in uniform and then certainly afterwards. Would you go back and do all that again?
Absolutely. Like, I'd just do it better. So my daughter's a active duty service member. She's a 25 Bravo. She's that's cybersecurity. Like, she's a cyber warrior.
Yep.
And she's a great ski racer, and she grew up at the Olympic Training Center. Like, all these cool things happened. So I don't see the negative in the injury. That doesn't mean like I didn't suffer. And at times, initially, early on, yes, absolutely. Like, that injury defined me. It's somehow, some way I alluded to the ball. You push the ball underwater, and the harder you push it down, the harder it pushes back. And eventually my personality launched, came back to the surface, and I was good to go. And so I can look at it now and see all the blessings and all the benefit and all the divine intervention that interceded in my life. And it wasn't subtle. To me, it was a hard hit, like left turn.
Yeah. Thanks so much for the time, Eric. This is great.
Yeah, thanks.
Appreciate it. I know we got more stories ahead. So, Eric, we had wrapped up our interview down in Texas, which was a great experience for both of us, I know. As we were editing the podcast, you had reached out because you asked for just a little time to clarify a few items from our interview. So the floor is yours. Want to turn it over to you for whatever points you'd like to clarify there.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. So the clarification, I just wanted to add, to the timeline because the linear progression of, military career, like there was a few bumps in the road, and I didn't feel comfortable addressing it at the time. But then when I watched the clip, I thought, I need to address this just from a ethical and just from a moral point of view. So so I just wanted to clarify that, my timeline coming to 2nd Ranger Battalion was 1992. I was 26 years old, 25 and a half, I think. And the progression for me was Special Forces selection and assessment, and then the SF medic course in San Antonio, the 18 Delta course, and I didn't pass it. So I got an opportunity to come to Ranger Battalion, which basically meant I come in and made it through RIP, Ranger indoctrination program, and then Sergeant Major LG called me into his office and said, "Hey man, you didn't pass the SF medic course, and so your selection and assessment to come to my Ranger Battalion is RIP to pre-Ranger to Ranger school and then to battalion." And so, I didn't really want to talk about my failures. I like talking about successes for sure.
Everyone does.
Things that I struggled with or I didn't do as well as I could have, or anyway, I avoided it down there in Texas, and I just wanted to clarify that here tonight, just from a integrity standpoint.
Yeah, I think everybody listening can understand that, and certainly people who have heard this podcast before will recall, like folks like Tom Shea who had to go to BUD/S several times, and totally understandable to not want to share something like that. I think it actually shows even more the perseverance you have, and probably another element that has made you so successful overcoming this life-altering event that you have so well.
Well, thanks, Ryan. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to get, to kind of tighten it up. I appreciate it.
No, absolutely. So thanks again, Eric. Appreciate it. And I'm sure everybody will further appreciate you as a person and what you've gone through hearing this.
Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed this combat story. People often write to me with incredible stories and suggestions for interviews. If you want to share a combat story of your own or from someone you served with, record yourself for up to 5 minutes and email it to ryan@combatstory.com. I'll select some of these stories and feature them at the end of our episodes. Thanks for listening. Stay safe.